India's foreign ministry released a statement saying it was being unfairly targeted by the U.S. It said, quote, "It is revealing that the very nations criticizing India are themselves indulging in trade with Russia. The targeting of India is unjustified and unreasonable." Ravi Agrawal is the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, previously served as CNN's New Delhi bureau chief, and he joins me now. Ravi, good to have you here. Watching Indian exports, or imports rather, of Russian oil over the last several years is truly remarkable. It now buys nearly half its oil from Russia, up from really a rounding error, 0.2%, I think, of its total oil imports, and it gets it at a discount, which is an enormous subsidy, in effect, to the Indian economy. I mean, is this something that India is willing to give up?
If they have to, they will. I mean, India's stated position is that they'll buy the cheapest oil they can find wherever it comes from. So if they have to move to Saudi or Iraq, their second and third biggest suppliers, they will do so. They will say they've been buying Russian oil because they were allowed to do so by the Americans, by the West. Much of what India is importing, it uses. Some of it actually refines into diesel and other crude-related products that it then exports onwards to Europe. So India's point has been for the last few years that, first of all, it is buying the oil under the price cap that was set by the West. Second, if it didn't do so, it would be buying oil from some other sources, which would then send the global crude prices up, which, as we know, the West hasn't wanted. So India's stance is really right now one of puzzlement. It doesn't understand why Trump is bringing up something that previous American administrations have not brought up.
One of Trump's favorite barometers of success is the gas price in the U.S., and if he does act on sanctions against Russia that he has threatened to impose from Friday, or in effect, to your point, force India to stop buying so much oil and potentially drive up the price of oil in another way. I mean, I wonder if Indian officials and others are betting to some degree that that's not a price that Trump is willing to pay, and that he won't follow through on these tariffs.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think Indian officials feel that Trump often pivots. So they're hoping that that might happen. There's a lot of back channel activity going on to try and convince the United States otherwise from its current course of action. But most of all, Indian imports of Russian crude have not stopped over the weekend. So India's betting that if Trump announces expanded tariffs on Indian products, they might have to just withstand the pain. Remember, India's also struck free trade agreements with the UK, with other countries. It's working on one with the EU that it's now expediting. But then lastly, India's willing to just sustain some pain, wait it out, as it were, because this was not the unpredictability they had signed up for.
And in part because the perception had been that Trump and Modi have a good personal relationship, right? And as we watch President Trump, he values personal relationships. I imagine there must be some surprise in India today, and perhaps even in Modi's inner circle, that the U.S. president is targeting them so directly.
There's surprise. There's also anger. I think, India felt like it really got along with Trump 1. What it may now be realizing is that Trump 2 is quite different from Trump 1, and that the close personal friendship, perceived friendship between Trump and Modi doesn't count for that much. I'll say one more thing, Jim. There's a security element here. When India and Pakistan clashed a few months ago, Trump has claimed that he made a phone call that then sort of led to a ceasefire. India denies this, and India has always denied that there's been any foreign involvement in any of its conflicts. This is a matter of, immense national pride. This disagreement between India and the United States, where Trump also then met a senior Pakistani general who then said, "Mr. President, you should get the Nobel Peace Prize for what you did." The Indian public opinion has really shifted on the United States. That imposes a lot of upward pressure on Modi, which is considerable and may constrain his ability to strike a favorable deal with the United States.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we've seen this in other countries too, right? Trump's targeting of Canada, for instance, arguably won the Liberals the election there, and now we're watching in Brazil, right? Trump targeting Brazil with tariffs because of the prosecution of Bolsonaro. You see Brazilians rallying around their president despite, real economic costs. Same for Canada. And I wonder, do you see a similar dynamic possibly playing out in India?
It is possible. Look, remember, India imports 90% of its fuel. It needs energy. It will go find it wherever it needs to. Also, Modi was just reelected last year. He's not going back to the polls for 4 more years, if at all he runs again. So I don't think any of this is going to move that quickly. But in terms of India's ability to sustain pain, and in as much as that pain has to be passed on to people, I think there might be a little bit more wiggle room than Trump might be imagining here. And also, remember, Indian relations with China have begun to thaw in recent weeks. India is sending a delegation to Moscow now. India likes to play all sides. It had been becoming a closer friend to the United States, but by no means is that guaranteed in the future.
The other issue that Trump has taken aim at is the fact that India buys the vast majority of its weapons from Russia, and Trump is often interested in expanding the market for U.S. defense manufacturers and producers. Is there any possibility of the U.S. working its way further into that market? Because it takes a lot to turn a ship, as it were, away from its long-term supplier, in this case, Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Look, there are 2 things here. There's purchasing new gear and equipment, aircraft, other stuff, and there's servicing older stuff. So in as much as the base of Indian product is mostly Soviet era, it still needs Russian supplies to service it, to get new arms and weaponry that goes into it. They're weaning themselves off of Russia. That's going to take many, many years. It's been underway for a while. But again, India is not going to put all of its eggs in the American basket. It also buys French, it buys from Israel, it even buys from Turkey. So that diversification, it's hard to argue against it in a moment like this, when your supposed ally is treating you in a way that has left basically all of the Indian diplomatic class completely confused and befuddled.
Ravi Agrawal, thanks so much for joining.